I'm now going to invite our third panelist, Gareth Williams, who is Strategy Director at the National Composite Centre.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be speaking to you today. So we've had some great talks and presentations today on hydrogen and setting some of the scene for why hydrogen is picking up momentum. And what I want to reinforce here is to echo a few words that Colette said around the need for connected innovation and how important innovation is. So I'll set up some context of the Hydrogen Innovation Initiative, which is something that we're working on with a number of partners involved here. And then I'll go into a little bit more detail on a specific area of interest, obviously as the National Composite Centre, on some of the pressurised storage tanks that are very relevant for transportation. So current collaborators on this concept, very much looking at coming together and as a catapult network and the technology centres, so the OGTC, the APC, the ATI and NPL, with the catapult network, as I said, we came together and said, right, what hydrogen is increasingly significant across all of our sectors. How do we accelerate the activity and make sure that we get the most value for the UK? So what we don't want to see is a hydrogen economy developed without the right investment in innovation and UK supply chains, so that we don't don't use this opportunity to actually develop the value in the UK supply chains, and we think that's really important. So between this network, it's kind of our roles in industry and innovation is to accelerate technology, the adoption of innovation, and to help drive that development in the UK for UK value. So hopefully none of these names are new to you. And what we've come together and we've developed this concept as a special purpose vehicle for the Hydrogen Innovation Initiative. And I'll go in a bit more detail as I go through. So the context and the rationale, so you'd see up in the top left, hopefully you recognise that from what Colette presented. It's a great diagram, schematic developed by Arup, which just highlights the concept, or a decent schematic of what the hydrogen economy looks like from end to end. And we found this really useful. So we went through and we overlaid some of the opportunities and the right to participate and the USPs of the UK in terms of abundant access to green energy, CO2 storage, locations, etc. And then we overlaid some of the technology challenges that really need to be addressed to make sure that we can generate hydrogen at a cost that works, distribute it from where it is generated to where it is consumed at a cost base that works to accelerate that technology in those consumption markets. And we recognise that that needs to be an end-to-end process, particularly if we need to accelerate it. In the middle, that also has to be supported by policy and the right standard and certification requirements for industry to actually adopt those technologies at an accelerated rate. So in particular, NPL's role in this is to help to identify the regulatory frameworks and the collectively the influence on policy that needs to be in place to help adopt those technologies so they don't become a barrier to entry. And as we came together a group, we were working on this for a number of months. The EU strategy was published, and there were some words in there that really chimed with why we had come together, and that was that we cannot, if we continue to innovate and develop technology in traditional sector-driven silos, we won't hit net neutrality in a cost-efficient way by 2050. So we need to build new links between sectors, between organisations, between places within nations, and between nations as well, because the hydrogen economy will go across borders, as many of our transportation methods will as well. So there's a number of organisations closely linked to government activity around supporting industry acceleration of these technologies. We want to play a more forthright role in helping industry move this forwards. But there are challenges, and we require coordinated intervention about both technical and non-technical issues to allow this to be accelerated efficiently. So we came together and we identified the need for a program of work. We called it end-to-end hydrogen, because it's really focused on the end-to-end activities and joining up those, the excellent work that everyone will do in their own sectors to make sure that we have a coordinated set of activities so that we have that efficient deployment. So we proposed to forge strategic linkages across the value chain and create a connected innovation backbone, really united against 4 things. First is driving a thriving hydrogen economy, so a key component to driving the UK to net zero. The second is to secure the UK as a hydrogen super supplier, so the domestic opportunity and also the export market opportunity that brings. To accelerate key technology innovations to secure the UK as a global leader in hydrogen related technology. And the fourth is, as we do all this, to make sure that we develop the UK value and the sovereign UK capabilities as we create these new supply chains. So we don't just solve the challenge by importing technology and then we're at on the reliance of overseas innovation development programs and incentives. So we had a very high level look across. So looking at, we broke the segments down to generation, distribution and consumption in terms of those markets, and then looked at the different technology challenges. And this is not exhaustive, this is just illustrative, because what we identified, as well as the technology challenges and the policy and non-technical gaps that need to be addressed within each sector, the technology innovation landscape, there's a lot of crossover between multiple sectors. And that's really important as you're going to develop new supply chains, for example, in pipeline technology. Every sector is going to require hydrogen transported in some form in a pipeline. So as you're seeding an industry with baseline IP, whether that's composite pipelines or non-metallic pipelines or other technologies that allow those pipelines to work with hydrogen, is to looking beyond those traditional markets and looking at adjacent markets to increase the business case for companies to enter those markets. And we're seeing that much more prevalent post-pandemic as companies are looking at beyond their traditional markets for future economic sustainability. So what do we propose to do? And this is still evolving and developing, but what we're trying to do is create a connected innovation ecosystem, specifically focusing on accelerating hydrogen technology. So there's great activity that will happen at academic level, but we want to make sure that for the key strategic priorities for the UK, that we have very good articulation of challenge-led research that are solving challenges that industry need. And through this mechanism, we also provide excellent routes for technology exploitation. At the kind of mid-TRL, which is very much where the catapults have been designed to help to bridge. We want to see that we have a strategic focus on the technologies that we're developing to help industry, and that we have a direct route to support industry to deploy those technologies to create that IP and then industrialize it with our partners and the funded programs, for example, the OGTC, APC, ATI is really their business as usual. In terms of doing that. So we looked across generation, distribution, consumption markets. There's multiple markets within that, but really essentially also what we're trying to really create is the cross-sectorial green threads, as I call them. So connecting how do you actually take green hydrogen, for example, where do you produce it? How do you distribute it? Where does it need to be for an aerospace market, for example? What's the infrastructure requirement for an airport? How does that connect with places? How does it connect with international hubs for air transport so that we have those roadmaps for deployment? And if we don't get that really clearly articulated for the strategic priorities, then you can imagine the amount of chaos that could ensue if we don't get this right. And innovation is going to be critical to accelerate things like cost down in all of these technologies, but increasing safety, decreasing weight in the system, for example. So as I said previously, we're creating a concept for a special purpose vehicle, so a single identifiable identity for us all to work within, that industry can engage with, that look at the funded enablers, the activities, the enabling technologies that the likes of the Catapult network need to develop and influence, and the access to facilities that industry need for testing, certification requirements, etc. And then how do we deploy those into industrial programs of work with industry and the collective partners within each sector. So I'm going to dive down a little bit more specifically on some of the technology challenges, and for the National Composites Centre, obviously the opportunity for composites. I'm going to still skim across this at a fairly high level. So across the value chains, we're looking at the generation requirements, offshore, onshore distribution, spoke distribution, so where you have actually local production rather than decentralized production versus centralized production, into the consumption markets, and then into energy generation as a consumption market as well. And the three priority products for composites that are going to add value across multiple sectors are pipes, pressure vessels, and cryogenic storage tanks. So there are various applications with known specifications, requirements for those technologies, and some that we're developing and working on with industry partners to identify what are the strategic priorities for those technologies, what are the challenges that industry needs support in solving, so that we can really truly accelerate these technologies. So some of this won't be a surprise to you, and E4Tech obviously much well versed onto the economic side of this, but the value proposition of fuel cell electric vehicles and hydrogen propulsion is increasing, and you can see some great road mapping activity from the APC here that have identified the role that CFRP and composite tanks will play in that to actually reduce the weight requirements of that fuel cell fuel storage capacity for hydrogen. And a great study that I picked up with Deloitte in China really looked at the break-even points for fuel cell electric vehicles compared to some of the incumbent technologies. And they will vary in different markets, but the composite pressure vessels, because of the inherent cost of carbon and they're not prevalent in the market at the moment, there's a huge opportunity to actually drive down the cost, increase the innovation in those technologies for a mass market, production market that we'll need to get to really see us drive those costs down. So the role that we play at the NCC is very much around the design, materials, manufacture, and the certification of the latest technologies and composite technologies for these pressurized vehicles, looking at the next generation of smart tanks, automated technology for manufacture to really drive that cost base down, increase the reliability, and drive weight down even further in these tanks, which will enable much more efficient hydrogen propulsion systems and reduce the whole life of the cost of those vehicles for industry and increase adoption